Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Double Down, the live news and affairs programme that puts people first. It's Thursday, the 28th of January 2021. We're broadcasting live from Dundalk and Dublin, and I am your host, Finbar Markey. Thanks for joining us on the show this evening, folks. We've got a busy show and a busy lineup this evening. Tonight, we're going to feature a discussion between Republican and pro-unionist community representatives and workers from working class areas of Derry. We pre-recorded this discussion this morning because some of the members were not available for the live show tonight. We had a very, very frank and honest conversation, and in many ways an eye-opening conversation about what the opinions and what the take on a border poll is, what their opinions in relation to a united Ireland and a border down the Irish Sea are. So we're going to play that pre-recorded interview in a few minutes. But first, I'd like to turn to some other news events that occurred this week. Richard Boyd Barrett of People Before Profit has raised concerns that COVID restrictions are being used by the Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Green government to suppress the democratic processes of the Houses of the Oireachtas. In a speech made earlier in the Dáil yesterday, Deputy Barrett slammed the government for cancelling leaders' questions. Can you roll that clip for us, please, Stephen?
Ceann Comhairle, in my opinion, I'm not exaggerating when I say that the government are using the COVID pandemic to gag the opposition and minimise the opportunities for the opposition to hold the government accountable at a time of national emergency when the questions that people are asking out there about the strategy around COVID, around the state of our health services and all the different knock-on issues that are affecting in a very profound way our population. One of those opportunities which is being denied to us because of the severe curtailment, and we accept there has to be some curtailment of Dáil activity, but the severe curtailment is Taoiseach's questions. And we've asked for this for weeks. The Taoiseach's question slot that normally comes after leaders' questions, where you, the Taoiseach, are questioned about the matters under your department, all the various subcommittees that deal with COVID and so on, and we're not allowed to ask you these questions. That is not acceptable as far as I'm concerned. It's a 40-minute slot. We've asked for it for the last 2 weeks, and it is being denied, and that is not accountability. That's not leadership on your part, and it does not give the public the opportunity to ask really urgent questions they have of government.
Thank you very much.
In other news, Joe Biden was hardly in office for a day when he jumped back on the war bandwagon. Policies that caused mayhem in the Middle East under the Obama and Clinton administration, which Biden was a part of, have been dusted off and they're being reignited again to cause more mayhem and destruction in the Middle East. Remember what happened to Syria when Biden, Obama and Clinton went in there to liberate the country. That nation is now in tatters. They tried to do it in Syria as well. They didn't succeed last time, but it would appear that Biden is going to have another go. US tanks and troops rolled across illegal border posts in East Syria last week to what they say is defend Syrian oil rigs and oil plants out there. But in reality, once more, it would appear that Syrian goods such as oil is being stolen by Western countries. Could you roll that clip of troops crossing the border there, please, Stephen?
The Pentagon revealed today the U.S. will not be keeping any revenue from oil fields protected by American troops in Syria. Remember, President Trump insisted last month that the U.S. would keep the oil, estimated to be worth $45 million a month. The president also ordered most U.S. troops out of Syria, but as Charlie D'Agata reports, some are moving back in.
American forces were once again on the move today in northeastern Syria, but far from pulling out as President Trump ordered only a few weeks ago. We saw U.S. soldiers reestablishing their presence here. Not that they were willing to share any details.
Just ask you what the purpose of your visit this morning is?
No questions.
But from what we could overhear, it was more of a meet and greet than a tactical deployment of U.S. protection.
These U.S. forces have been ordered by President Trump to secure the oil fields here, but with the Russians, the Syrian regime, and Turkish forces trying to take a piece of this territory, America's influence here has been severely restricted.
The Kurdish commander of American allied troops said the U.S. had no choice but to reconsider its drawdown, but he said the main reason is definitely not oil. not the oil itself, but a watch over the territory that encompasses it.
Protecting the oil fields might sound pretty straightforward, but take a look at this. Securing the oil essentially means securing this entire region,
which helps justify the U.S. presence here.
Today, a U.S. military spokesman told us the repositioning of forces is to defeat the remnants of ISIS and to protect critical infrastructure. But Nora, the Trump administration at first said a small number of troops would return to protect the oil in an area hundreds of miles from where we found them today.
All right, Charlie, thank you.
Okay, there seems to be a lot of emphasis on Trump there, but those troops actually rolled across the border under Biden last week. Not content with interfering in the Middle East and reigniting policies of destruction, Biden has decided this week to recognize Juan Guaido as president of Venezuela. In what can only be described as a ridiculous move, Biden has decided to double down on Trump's assault on Venezuelan democracy by recognizing Guaido, who is no longer even an elected official within the National Assembly, having failed to get elected, in fact, having failed to even run in the assembly elections that occurred before Christmas. There has been a campaign in the EU by MEPs such as Claire Daly and Mick Wallace to try to stop the EU from recognizing Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela. And that campaign came to a success this week when the EU announced they will no longer recognize Guaido as the president or interim president of Venezuela. And yet, even when the EU realized their mistake, Biden hasn't, and he's actually recognized Guaido this week. So I think all of that information with regards to Biden's international moves shows that we're moving back to a war footing all around the world in terms of American interference. Talking about war and talking about Mick Wallace MEP, this week Mick was forcefully condemning EU hypocrisy when it comes to supporting Western-backed Hong Kong protesters and yet turning a blind eye, if not assisting, oppressive regimes to oppress their own people and to invade other countries. Can you roll that clip, Stephen, of Mick Wallace in what I have to say is one of the most forceful speeches that I've ever heard him make or anybody make in the EU Parliament?
Thanks, President. Today we have our third resolution this term in support of Western-backed anti-China protesters in Hong Kong, where police have killed no protester yet. Why don't we want to talk about Yemen or Ethiopia? We have not had one resolution on the Saudi UAE genocidal war being waged against the people of Yemen. The UN says the greatest humanitarian crisis in the world is taking place there. Millions are being intentionally starved to death. The UN says the number of people in Tigray, in northern Ethiopia, in need of life-saving assistance to be at least 2.3 million. As a result of the war crimes of the unelected Abiy Ahmed. The changing of the guard in Ethiopia in 2018 was considered by the US as an opportunity for disrupting Chinese influence, and now the US and EU turn a blind eye to Abiy's war crimes. And all we want to talk about in here are US-backed protesters in Hong Kong. Meanwhile, the EU and their friends are immune from criticism. And when you have armed contracts with totalitarian regimes who carry out terrible atrocities, you look the other way. I will take seriously the concern expressed in here for US-paid journalists in prison in Vietnam when you deal with the millions of starving and dying children in Yemen and demand they be free from Saudi UAE aggression and free from the fear of the weapons of the US, Canadian, UK, French, German, Swedish, Spanish
and Mick goes on there a bit. It's a very forceful speech. I'd advise you to have a look for that and to watch it. It's a crying shame that the Irish media continue to fail to report on the great representation that independent MEPs like Claire Daly and Mick Wallace present on the international scene in our name. in a further sign that the warmongers are back and that destabilization at a global level is starting to happen again since the inauguration of Joe Biden. The BBC have been caught out interfering in Russian domestic politics in what appears to be lies to contribute to attempts at destabilizing Russia. Protests were called by what many described as a minority Western-backed opposition leader, Alexei Navalny. Navalny was recently arrested by Russian authorities for parole violations. A protest by Navalny supporters was called for last Saturday and was not granted a permit by authorities. Hours before the protest, the BBC was reporting that the metro was shut down to prevent protesters from attending the protest. Eva Bartlett, an independent journalist recently stationed in Russia, went down to the metro stations in St. Petersburg to see for herself, and this is what she reported through Twitter at the same time that the BBC was saying that the metro in St. Petersburg was closed. Could you roll that, please, Stephen?
So I'm in the Tverskaya metro, where you can see people are coming and going. So clearly it's still functioning. Yet around 15 minutes ago, a BBC correspondent tweeted that the police have closed off the metro to prevent people from reaching Tverskaya, Pushkin Square, where there's a pro-Navalny demonstration going to occur.
Okay, so again, just letting us all know that the BBC have to be taken with a grain of salt, just like RTE. Okay, folks, that's all the news for this week. We're about to roll what I think was a very in-depth and a very frank discussion between independent Republican and pro-union community workers and representatives from in and around Derry. We discussed a united Ireland, the outcome of the Brexit negotiations, the potential for violence into the future, and we also discussed how independent Republicans and pro-union communities can work together towards some kind of a solved solution into the future. We were joined by independent Republican Councillor Gary Donnelly, who's also a member of the 32 County Sovereignty Movement and is also an ex-prisoner, his colleague Michael Gallagher, and we were also joined by Derek Moore, and Brian Doherty from the Northwest Cultural Partnership, which is an organisation or agency that aims to promote pro-union culture and traditions throughout Ireland. It was, as I say, it was a very frank and a very interesting discussion. We're going to roll that now, and afterwards we'll just look at some more comical events that have occurred in the news this week. We're joined this morning by Councillor Gary Donnelly and his colleague Michael Gallagher, who are representatives and community workers in and around Republican areas or communities in Derry City and its environs. We're also joined by Brian Doherty and Derek Moore, that are pro-union community workers and cultural workers in the Northern Ireland area and even outside of Northern Ireland into Donegal. As we already explained, we had Gary Donnelly and we had Brian Doherty on separately to discuss issues before, such as the United Ireland, Brexit, the concept of a border down the Irish Sea, and the implications and responses of their communities. Well, we have arranged to have both Brian and Gary back on with two of their colleagues to discuss these matters in more detail. We are going to be time limited because there are a lot of questions to get through. So I'm going to get stuck in before looking at all of those politically detailed questions. Can I ask, and this is an open question to everybody, maybe we'll start off with Gary. Have any of you had any reluctance or concerns about coming on the show tonight in terms of the response that you might get from your communities? If I could maybe open that up to Gary first.
Hello, Thunbar. How's things?
Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, by the way.
No, I personally don't have any concerns. You know, I would know. I have been in company of Brian and Derek before. We've had conversations, you know, uncomfortable conversations at times, but at least it's happening. And I think what we need is more of this type of stuff. So no concerns from my part.
Okay, and Brian, how are you coming on in terms of your response from your community? And
I mean, personally, again, like Gary was saying, I mean, I have no personal concerns. I mean, the
dialogue and building social capital has been something that we, as an organisation, and me personally, have been keen to do over the last 20 or 30 years. There will be, no doubt, potentially certain individuals who may raise a few eyebrows, but going by the announcement the other day with the PSNI keeping an eye on our social media posts, maybe I might have more concerns about them than the general public.
Right, that's quite interesting. Michael, did you have any concerns coming on this morning?
No, just echoing what Gary was saying, that no personal concerns. It's just that things like this probably need to happen. People come out of their comfort zones, and as such, they make any sort of progress.
And Derek, any worries?
No real worries at all. I think one of the biggest problems that unionists have, or pro-union people, is that they don't speak up for themselves enough, and they don't make their points in open forums rather to each other. So I really look forward to making a point in open forum.
Maybe we're at a point in time that talking is really needed. There's been a lot of news coverage over the last few days about a border poll indicating that the majority of people in Northern Ireland, be it a slim majority at the moment, a majority of people would like a border poll on the question of a united Ireland. What do you think? And I'll put this over to Brian and to Derek, and maybe Brian first. What do you think your community's reaction to that is? Have you been talking to people? Are they taking it as a serious move towards a border poll, or is it blasé for them?
I think it's blasé. I mean, border polls have been coming out on the constitutional issue now for a number of years. I mean, this recent one by Lucid Talk, which is in the Sunday Times, I mean, it covered just over 2,000 people. So, I mean, you have to take it to a certain degree with a pinch of salt, which is very small. It's very small coverage. But I mean, if you delve into the figures, they're open to interpretation as well. I mean, 51% saying they're in favour of a border poll, but I would imagine there's a significant number of those from the unionist community who are saying, bring it on. Well, what I would pick up as well is that, that the majority are still not in favour of United Ireland, which is quite astounding. Those figures have actually stayed quite consistent even in the last 4 or 5 years, despite all the media hype and the opportunism that came out of the Brexit debate. So, I mean, what I would say is if there isn't strong support for a border poll now, after all the Brit bashing of the last 3 or 4 years, then when would there be?
Okay. And Derek, what's your response? What reaction did you get, do you think, from your community about this poll?
Well, personally, I take all them polls with a pinch of salt. You just have to look at the recent American stuff and all, the general election, Theresa May, everything. There's a huge, depends what you ask and depends who you ask, I suppose, as Brian sort of mentioned there. I think for me, the huge problem at the minute is that all the talk and all the drive is really coming from republicanism and nationalism. And for me, I'm always saying, there's not a clear message anyway. Gary's vision of United Ireland's completely different to Sinn Féin's and stuff like that. So I think that, we need to be getting the message out. And I suppose over the next year, we will be taking the opportunity to put a pro-union point of view on the union and on the benefits of living in Northern Ireland, which is our home for everyone.
Okay, and we'll give you a platform to do that as well. Gary, with regards to the poll, what's your reaction to it? What's your community's reaction, do you think?
Well, my personal reaction could be similar to some of the comments that has just been said there. I do take polls with a pinch of salt, and as Derek has pointed out, polls can be wrong. We see that the elections in the US with Trump, we've seen it with the Tories, we've seen it with Brexit. But having said that, there is, in my view, a growing momentum and a push for Irish unity, and but there would be Republicans who will push a border poll. However, I would have my own issues with the border poll, and I wouldn't be in supportive of a border poll. Whilst
Don't extrapolate on that point, that why you wouldn't be in favour.
Well, it's a British construct. We have the triple lock from Good Friday. It could legitimise British rule here. If I was a unionist, I would be pushing for a border poll. You know, it's not something I as a Republican would be pushing. I would push for the momentum for a united Ireland, but I don't see a border poll as the mechanism to achieve that. You know, because there's a lot of ambiguity. Who will write the question? There's even talk now of what majority would need to be. There's talk about 65% turnout and a 60% majority. That's been muted by Tories regarding Scottish independence, and we have similar utterances from Free State politicians. So there's a lot of difficulties and a lot of dangers in this for me as a Republican.
Okay, Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I work closely with Gary, so a lot of what he said would be my sentiments. The only thing I would add to that is that a caveat, the Republicans or nationalists who think this is a way to unite Ireland, that it's not just going to be a binary question. The British are going to control a lot of it, and that basically I don't think it's just going to be as black and white as it's going to be painted out as a roadmap to unite Ireland. I don't think it'll achieve that either.
Okay. And this is a question to everybody, and I might start out with Derek, if you don't mind on this one, Derek. There have been several statements this year from sources claiming to represent loyalist paramilitary factions in and around Belfast. And their statements have indicated that further moves towards a united Ireland will be met with resistance. And I think the inference was that it could be potentially violent resistance. What are your thoughts on that statement? Do you think that that's a real threat? Or do you think that's just a knee-jerk response to things like polls and Brexit negotiation outcomes?
Well, my own ethos is I'm totally against any form of violent action at all. I went to a Sinn Féin conference, which Alex Kane was speaking at, and he brought up the same thing. And I think the concept is, why would people in Southern Ireland, vote in favour of any form of united Ireland if there was any form of, say, a one-off Monaghan or Dublin bombing? For me, really, the things 9/11 more or less finished off effective terrorism throughout the world, as far as I'm concerned, and technology is now king for state forces in any country. So I don't think there'll be any form of sustained campaign at all. I don't think that paramilitaries, loyalist paramilitaries, maybe have the wherewithal to do it. But I do feel that even the threat of it has the potential to derail any form of border poll or any form of voting. I mean, why would people in the south want that?
What would your response, Michael, be from, as a community worker in Republican areas, what would your response be to those statements from people claiming to be representing loyalist paramilitaries?
Well, loyalist paramilitary violence has always been a factor in the six-county state throughout its existence. But the question has to be, who would they target? Would they be targeting Catholic civilians, or would they be targeting the people who brought about the situations they're talking about regards Brexit and G borders and all that, which is the British government and the DUP? So my question would be, who would they be targeting? Who would be the target of this violence? Who would they be seeking to redress this issue with through arms?
Okay, a good question. Does Brian or Gary want to come in there with any comment on that?
Yeah, there has been a fluid situation. Even in the last couple of days, there's been a growing kind of movement led largely by the Progressive Unionist Party and the TUV looking at, and it's really, it's not so much, I suppose, the threat of loyalist violence, but more of a kind of disillusionment with how the border down the Irish Sea and the DUP have handled it. So to me, it's not so much a kind of return to physical violence, more of a kind of frustration that there hasn't been proper political leadership within loyalism for a number of years. That's something I brought up in the previous interview. What people are looking out for within unionism and loyalism is proper leadership and an opportunity to get their voice heard. They're not hearing that from the Ulster Unionist Party or the DUP. So to me, it's more about kind of how does that new form of leadership emerge, or re-emerge, and maybe being cynical, maybe being a wee bit unfair, but I think that there's a wee bit of political opportunism as well coming from the TUV and PUP, who see this as an opportunity to be that voice, that alternative voice, which could be pretty much legitimate, but it could also be about trying to gain votes from the DUP and Ulster Unionist Party.
Would that worry you?
No, it wouldn't worry me at all. I think we're crying out for as many forms of effective leadership as we can get, be it through organisations like ourselves who've become I suppose a civic stroke political voice here locally in Londonderry. So the more choice the unionist population have, the better. I mean, I wouldn't obviously advocate for any form of street violence or physical violence, but I think it's been a myth that's grown up over the last 4 years, particularly with the Brexit debate, that the Loyalists are waiting on the sidelines ready to attack. They never have, and they've never shown any inclination to that. To me, it was opportunism with the pro-EU debate, which proved to be unfounded. And I think a lot of it may as well still be coming from that media narrative. I mean, now that the hard border down the island hasn't happened because of Brexit, they're looking, I think, for another excuse to goad almost the unionist community.
Okay. Gary, do you want to come in there with anything?
Yeah, look, I wouldn't be no expert on or best place to establish the veracity of these type of statements, but I think that there is loyalist violence. It does exist. Particularly, there's been a number of attacks in the northwest. Shooting and pipe bomb attacks. But I think Mickey hit the button there when he says, who would be the target here? Who is in my view, the biggest threat to unionism, and I've said this before, is the Tory government. Do you know what I mean? It's that hard Brexit, middle England. And there's absolutely no strategy in loyalist paramilitaries attacking innocent Catholics, and I think a lot of this will come down to who's actually sponsoring them. I think there's no doubt, in my opinion, is that in the past loyalist paramilitaries have been created, armed, financed, and supplied with intelligence, almost sponsored by the British state. That will be a factor. That isn't there, then it's a different ballgame. But I do think that there will be a strong pushback from unionism in respect of any formal moves towards a united Ireland. But I think the idea of violence is pushed by the establishments in order to promote their agendas too.
That's an interesting point. Derek, not Derek, it was Brian, I think, mentioned this border down the Irish Sea as a result of the outcome of Brexit negotiations. In your opinion, is that what the outcome has been, the border down the Irish Sea? And what is the response from the community, people you've been talking to? And we'll move on to Derek after that, if you don't mind.
Sorry, do you want myself or Derek?
Brian, if you can first. Yeah, please.
I mean, it's semantics to me. I didn't waken up on 1st of January and think that, oh no, I'm disconnected from the mainland. I mean, it's unfortunate, and I think, but I think a lot of it has been, around a kind of lack of kind of trust and honesty between the British government and the DUP here locally. I mean, there's no doubt that the DUP made a mess of it, and at some point need to put their hands up and kind of recognise that. But to me, I think a lot of it will be resolved. There's opportunities, I think, within Brexit, and it was encouraging to see some of the captains of industry coming out last week, like Nissan and Sunderland, declaring that the Brexit won't affect the jobs, despite that being, a core point of the argument prior to us leaving. There's opportunities within the city alone, with Foyle Port potentially becoming a free port. There's enterprise zone opportunities. There's doors that open that the EU slammed shut previously. I mean, we used the example of Shannon Airport in the south, which was kind of considered a free port, and a number of jobs around that area were lost because of the EU restrictions and regulations. So to me, it shouldn't all be declared negative. And then what we've got to understand as well is the EU have to take some responsibility for this, because a lot of the delays at the moment, and the scaremongering around shortages and supermarkets, which is a nonsense, is coming from the huge amount of red tape and bureaucracy that the EU are implying, which they always imply on everything, be it from SEUPB funds right through to how they've operated their business, for the last 20 or 30 years. They're obsessed with bureaucracy, and it's inefficient and it's ineffective and it's dictatorial. So the argument needs to go back to asking what the EU responsibility or what their influence is and all this. And you see the current arguments going on now about the vaccine and how they've completely, the EU have completely messed up the rolling out of the vaccine across the EU countries. So it's not just Britain's fault. We've got to get away from this Brit bashing and look who else is to blame and who else can actually help resolve some of the teething problems that we have.
I think probably if we were honest with ourselves and tried to be neutral and looked at the Brexit negotiations, we could see, to use a common phrase, there's numpties on both sides in both Dublin and London, I think. Would you like, Derek, to add anything to Brian's response to the question about a border down the Irish Sea? In your mind, is there a border down the Irish Sea? What's your and your community's response?
Well, I suppose, it's quite a mess at the minute. I didn't vote for Brexit myself, and I'll take some convincing that it's going to be the best. But you never know. In the long run, it could be. I think most people basically just get on with things because those things are way beyond our control. And I don't think that we're going to make very much difference. I've always said all along that, as far as I'm concerned, money talks and money will make it work in the end up. As for the community, I suppose there are people, again, but is it scaremongering? My own wife said about stuff not being on shelves and stuff like that. But, I'm sure that'll resolve itself.
Okay. Gary and Michael, maybe start off with Michael. There appears to be a border down the Irish Sea. Is that not enough for Republicans?
No, I don't think it is. I think echoing what Brian and Derek said, that the ramifications will be long term. The short term ramifications just seem to be a nuisance for lorry drivers. As regards Republican objectives, it's it's nowhere near. Like the PSNI is still the police force who's plying their wares around the streets of Cregan here, harassing and intimidating people. The writ of Boris Johnson and the Westminster government still rule large over the 6 counties. I mean, no one here, Derek, Brian, Gary, or myself, have or can or will be able to cast a vote for Rishi Sunak, for Priti Patel, or for Boris Johnson. We ultimately dictate what happens in the 6 counties. So that's still there. There's still social and economic deprivation, and the politics in the 6 counties is still as backward as ever. So, it's so much the same, that the economic border down the Irish Sea, whatever the ramifications in the future, we do not know. But in the short term, no, it has no bearing on the current situation. The status quo is very much in place.
Okay, Gary, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I suppose that, echo what Michael's saying, the British, the apparatuses all still exists. And I'm not sure that a simple national demarcation of a border between Ireland and Britain will satisfy, millions of Irish people seeking genuine reunification. And, I think we need to get away from that shallow thinking that just by denying one section of the inhabitants of this state, what they believe is their appropriate constitutional, legal or economic entitlements or even association with Britain, that the rest of the population, that we are happy or should be happy. My identity, my Irish identity, is no way validated by sort of invalidating the identity of anyone else. And I'm talking about the unionist community when I'm saying that, and neither does it, please, it doesn't, I don't take any sense of satisfaction by seeing anyone sort of disconnected from their own identity. I think that Irish self-determination, it will and it should continue beyond simply the implementation of the so-called Irish Protocol. I think it's a lot deeper than that, even in the effect of a united Ireland, as it's been said, it's not a matter of removing one flag and replacing it with another. We need proper, we need to be looking after all the citizens of the country. So no, definitely not. I don't take any pleasure in that.
Okay. And Is there a triumphalism and a certain bravado developing in the nationalist community in relation to, the moves, what appears to be moves towards a united Ireland and things like that? Is there any concerns that there's a triumphalism about that? Can I pass that on to maybe Derek first and get Derek's idea? Is there any worries, or is there any? Have you noted yourself that there seems to be this almost moving towards victory after hundreds of years, kind of an attitude?
Well, I think as Brian alluded to earlier, there has been the last 4 years of sort of really like Brit bashing and etc. And as I've alluded to earlier, one of the big problems is we haven't stood out as pro-union people and made an argument against that. So I think it's easy to understand the thinking. The Republicans have had 100 years of folk stories about the great reuniting, even though the Northern Republicans were abandoned in the first place, similar to the Southern Unionists. So, and the other big problem for me is, and we've had discussions on it before, I think Northern Republicans and a lot of people who live in the North don't realise how addicted they are to a British way of life. We live in a society, that basically is fairly free for all of us. Your thinking is allowed, whatever you wish to be, Irish, British, or whatever, and that entitlement is there. I think in the main, a lot of people are really more interested in getting on with their own lives, like feeding their children, educating their children, and knowing that when you're sick, you can go to a free health service. No, there's a lot of unknowns in a united Ireland, and I think that sometimes some Republicans are deluding themselves by thinking that that it's going to happen easily. I look on it as a sort of Moses project. A lot of them can see the united Ireland, but Moses never got there either.
Okay. Would Brian like to come in on that? Have you sensed a triumphalism, bravado?
Not within the local community. It has come where it's come from, and without sounding like a broken record, I mean, it's really coming from people who don't live in working class nationalist or Republican communities or work there. It's really been coming from, I suppose, the mainstream political parties, particularly Sinn Féin and the SDLP, but also academia and the media. I mean, I'm not too sure how much of the triumphalism is real. I mean, if you listen to Michael and Gary here as well, I mean, who do work in those communities, they're a lot more measured and their approach and a lot more realistic and a lot more honest about it. So I mean, to me, as I say, it's coming from academia, it's coming from mainstream media, and also some kind of spin doctors and egomaniacs in social media as well.
Okay, Gary, do you want to come in there at all? Do you have a sense of a coming victory? Do you think that a triumphalism is a healthy thing at this time, or?
Definitely not. Look, there's no doubt that we live in a society here that a lot of people, some people anyway, subscribe to that if it's bad for unionism, it's good for nationalism or republicanism. And when you just look at social media and you see, and there's been two events here sort of locally, and when you read the comments on social media, one was the death of a local man here, a local Republican, and when it goes on to the media, there's just a lot of triumphalism and really sort of sectarianism. The other one would be the release of Michael Stone. So there's no doubt that exists. And what doesn't help also is that when you see politicians, there was a recent parade in Strabane within the last few years, and when you see a prominent nationalist politician dancing up the street with a tricolour around her shoulder, like some green version of Orange Lil, that type of stuff is not it's not helpful. But I think we would be naive to think that in some corners that there wouldn't be at the very least sort of quiet satisfaction of the way that things have turned out after Brexit, because by and large a lot of nationalists campaigned against it. I wasn't one of them, and many unionists voted in support of it, and in getting that sort of Brexit, the unionism sort of enacted, and in my view, a lot of damage to the union, when in fact they thought that they were taking steps to sort of solidify their future within it. having said that, I would advocate that we need a more sensitive and diplomatic approach, devoid of triumphalism, because it's not my style. And I believe that, when we're talking about unification and integration of everyone on the island, I think it needs to be done in a sort of socially just and inclusive way. And it's about bettering the lives of everyone who lives on this island, and that includes working class communities who have probably, no doubt, have suffered most. And that, to me, as a Republican, that's as a result of the outworking of colonialism and imperialism and the conflict which evolved from that.
Okay. I was going to ask Brian and Derek, but I don't know if you've already answered it just now. I was going to ask you if you or your communities had any specific worries about what would your objections be to, other than the historical aspects of things, what would your objections to a United Ireland be? Would there be any fears or concerns? When you look back at our history, we're all brought up to believe that whenever major historical events happened in terms of Ireland and Britain, that there'd be massacres, that there'd be all of these horrible events to occur, and that's been cycled over centuries at this stage. Are there any concerns in modern times that your communities would be oppressed or suppressed if there was United Ireland in any way? Is that one of the concerns?
Yeah. It's not. I think we all try to be pragmatic and realistic and honest about it. And I know we shouldn't go back into history, but what has re-emerged, particularly with the anniversary this year in 2021, there's been a lot of commentary, particularly from Southern sources, referring back to the impact of the Civil War and the Protestant community in and around Cork, for example, and the ethnic cleansing of the Protestant population. That continued right through the century, and when you look at figures of the Protestant community in Donegal now compared to what they were then. But I don't honestly believe that if there was United Ireland tomorrow that type of genocide would happen again. But the concerns I would have really are around the basic human rights around equality and recognition of my culture. I've been a community worker here for 30 years in Derry, and we've been a minority community here for 30 years, and I've spent those 30 years doing, fighting for the rights of the Unionist population, the Loyalist population in the city here. So I would see how Derry, Strabane District Council have treated Unionists in the city probably as a microcosm of how they may be treated in United Ireland. You look at how Dublin has treated Donegal, for example. So all those economic impacts and that strive for equality will come to the fore. There's also huge issues. No one is going to vote for a United Ireland based on the slogan on the side of a bus the way that with Brexit, nor are they going to vote for United Ireland based on a couple of bullet points on posters that Sinn Féin had up before Christmas. One of the benefits of Brexit has been that no one ever again is going to have the wool pulled over their eyes and go into a major decision without really going through the minutiae of the impact. And to me, as a Protestant in Ireland, the questions I'd be asking is, well, what happens to my beloved Northern Ireland football team? You wouldn't ask a Liverpool fan to merge with Everton or Man City to merge with Man United, and that's a real practical issue. What happens to the national anthem? What happens to the flag? What happens to the expression of cultural identity? Will Orange Order be able to march and parade in Dublin? So if you take away all the huge economic arguments and benefits, there's the social benefit, the social impact that all needs to be worked out. And at the moment, it goes back a wee bit to the issue around the time for a border poll. Do we really, after coming out of Brexit, being in the middle of COVID, is energy really there within the community to go through all those discussions at this stage?
Okay, I think this leads on to our next question. I won't put that out to anybody else because there's a lead that was kind of leading to a following question. Gary, last year you put a motion to the floor in Derry City Council to not commemorate in any way the 100 years of partition of the north and the south of Ireland. At the time, Sinn Féin and the SDLP supported that motion, and we spoke to Brian about that, and Brian had said at the time that he expected it from yourself, but he was pretty surprised and shocked by the SDLP and Sinn Féin, who were always talking about acknowledging and recognising other people's traditions, etc., and that they went on a little bit of a triumphalist rant in relation to this. Are there any circumstances, Gary, in which you would, if not materially support yourself, that you would not object to the commemoration of 100 years of partition or something like that? So, for instance, let's say there was a United Ireland, and at some stage that historical event was proposed to commemorate that event in a United Ireland. Would you object to that event then? I'm just trying to find out where the boundaries are here.
Well, look, you were talking about that, about the SDLP and Sinn Féin. It's my opinion that we're in a different place now than we were a month ago regarding my motion, because it has been rescinded. And I view that, as pandering the unionism. It's fundamental for me in, partition, and we don't have to rehearse the arguments what partition has done to this island and to the people on this island, and including the people in Britain. The reality is that partition exists, and all that flows from partition is very alive and well, and we're living that out on a daily basis here. But in the context of an overall settlement, the absence of conflict, the absence of, sovereignty, the conflict over sovereignty, by all means, unionist community and their culture and that needs to be, protected, and they need to be able to exercise that right, in a non-triumphant way, not and where it's welcome, And I think when we look at Rosnowla and Donegal, I think, that's a model that where it passes off very peacefully. It's a family-oriented day out, and nobody bats an eyelid, So I think the problems that we have at the minute is that imperialism and interference is very much alive and well, and that will taint any type of it taints all situations that we're faced with.
Yeah. So let me be clear in what you're saying here. In the circumstances in which there was a united independent Ireland, you would be a lot more open to commemorating historical facts and events.
Well, look, as a Republican, that's a basic tenet of my republicanism. It's in our flag, it's in our proclamation, it's in all our documents, and we have to practice what we preach. That is it. Michael, would your thoughts be in the same vein as Gary's?
Yes, I would. I think that this notion that it's orange versus green is anathema to republicanism. Republicanism is about a political project. They give the people of Ireland their national self-determination. They have control over their own destinies. And in the event of that happened, I think the Republicans would have to go that extra mile to accommodate unionists because of the historical circumstances that we find ourselves in. And as Gary said, we have to practice what we preach and accommodate and make this as comfortable a society for unionists as possible, be that political power, be that cultural events and the such. Republicans would have to demonstrate to that section of our population that they're welcome in a new and a great Ireland.
When does that start? And from the point of view of, like, if I am going to ask Brian and Derek now, they are words. How reassuring are those words? I know that both parties here tonight have been working together, sharing community services, talking to each other for a few years now. But does comments like that reassure you, Derek and Brian, in terms of those kind of concerns that you'd have about your culture being suppressed?
Well, I mean, I am a bandsman, so I'm in a band, I'm very proud of it. And I'd have to say, Finbar, the only place that the suppression of culture happens is in Northern Ireland. we're very comfortable going to Limerick International Marching Bands Festival in Limerick and stuff, where you have 10,000 people with tricolours on the streets shouting, play the sash, play the sash. You can back up their own city. In times in the past, there have been 20 or 30 people standing at the diamond, maybe Gary and that was among them, saying this is a, triumphalism and stuff. So I think, people's perceptions are slightly different. As far as we're concerned, it's completely cultural. I'm not saying that it's all perfect or there's not instances where there is bad behaviour. But I mean, organisations like ourselves who have worked in the city here through the Maiden City Accord and all, which is a protocol on parading and stuff like that. But it's basically it's a roadmap for everyone to look at and for everyone to try and enjoy it. As I say, we have really no problem in Southern Ireland portraying our culture. We had a band in last year down in Sligo at the Fla and stuff like that there. So I mean, all the issues around suppression of culture have come from Northern, and even some of the stuff that has happened in Southern Ireland was Northern people down watching it and giving off about Protestants actually being in the Republic of Ireland. So the Good Friday Agreement actually would give us a lot of control around culture stuff in the unlikely scenario that United Ireland would ever come about. But there's a lot of things that we could work on there.
Okay. And Brian, and I'll jump over to the next question, but only because we're getting tight for time at this stage and there's a good few questions to go through yet. Are there any circumstances in which you, and do you think maybe members of your community, would accept a severance from London connections and controls in terms of authority and having the independence, Northern Ireland having the independence to make all decisions? So a separate Northern Ireland in some way, whether it's in a United Ireland or not. Are there any circumstances in which you would support that type of severance? For instance, if there, and let's be really imaginative, if there was a tyranny took over in London and it created an authoritarian regime that would seemed impossible to move, even at that stage, would you consider a severance? I'm just trying to establish borders and boundaries here.
What do you mean when a tyranny takes over in London? I think it's already happened. But to me, I wouldn't get on a boat and sail to Scotland like Arlene or move to Florida like Peter Robinson. I'd still stay here and my country. But to me, an independent Ulster, and I know Glennie Barr was a big advocate of that in the past. But to me, it's about like, again, going back using a sport analogy, it's like going back to a football match and drawing one each and coming off the field. No one's really happy. So I don't know why it would be seen as a kind of morally as a win or a satisfactory position. Economically, it would be a complete non-starter. I mean, I think the reason why the Scottish referendum will ultimately fail will be because the economics don't add up in Scotland. And whenever the last referendum happened in Scotland, the analysis showed that it was actually the mothers who voted to stay because they were able to detach themselves from the kind of romantic idealism of Braveheart to look at how it might impact on their children and their grandchildren. So they were a lot more pragmatic and realistic.
Instead,
Scotland can't maintain itself economically. What chance does a population of 1.6 million with a very low manufacturing yourself?
Okay, we'll step back, and instead of just looking at sovereign Northern Ireland, any form of severance from London, I think that's the point I'm really trying to get to, that no matter what London does into the future, will there be any circumstances in which you'll say we need to get away from London, whether it's to get into the EU, whether it's to join the United Ireland or be sovereign? Is there any circumstances you think where you would advocate for a severance from London?
Personally, I don't. I mean, despite how they've handled Brexit and what's happened recently, I still think they're the best case scenario. I mean, it's a huge safety net. Being the 7th largest economy in the world compared to the 31st and starts 34th in the south. I mean, I know it maybe part of the shared Ireland discussion going forward, and people talked about it in United Ireland, there still being a devolved government in Belfast. To me, that's, it's just a different flip of the same coin from London. In fact, it would probably feel less secure given our peripherality geographically from Dublin, and again, going back to how it's impacted in the economy in Donegal, I would have huge concerns there. I mean, listen, I'd vote against it, I'd argue against it, but I wouldn't pick up arms if it happened, But to me, I just don't think. I think it's probably the least best case scenario of where we're at the moment.
Okay, Derek, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I would just say, I think one of Gary's earlier points is probably fairly valid. We do have to worry about English nationalism and Northern Ireland and an England first approach. I think as someone from Northern Ireland, I feel I feel closer to Welsh and Scottish people, maybe because I'm a rugby player. But so the English question is always going to be there. For me, it'll boil down basically to the financial stuff and all, and I've had the discussion before, maybe with Gary and Michael, a united Ireland based on the promise of Britain paying for it for the next 50 years, must be an anathema to Republicans. I mean, what kind of united Ireland is that there? And who would trust Britain, once it's signed over to pay for anything? And how would that leave Northern Republicanism, with Southern Irish people, if they bring something on them that ultimately causes their economy and stuff major problems?
Okay. It sounds to me that although none of you would ever advocate for a separation, if there was a separation that was economically viable and that maintained, if not improved, people's standard of living, that is not something that you would physically resist anyway, I think is what you're saying there. Gary and Michael, I'm going to invert that question over to yourselves. Is there, if Britain tomorrow became, and you both guys proclaim to be Republican socialists, if Britain tomorrow became a socialist utopia, if everybody was so happy, so wealthy, had lots of time to themselves, if everything was just hunky-dory because of some changes with the London Northern Irish relationship in which they remained connected, would you accept that socialist Republican and give up your socialist utopia and give up your Republican ideals for United Ireland? Or is there anything that would change your mind?
Look, it's very, very hypothetical. It hasn't happened, and my view, it's not going to happen. But if it did happen, it would still be subverting the sovereignty of the island. There's people in Donegal and Dublin and Cork and Kerry, and it would still be subverting that and people in the 6 counties. Look, I'm Irish. My identity is Irish, and I want to live and reside in Ireland. When you talk about being tyrannical, the Free State, it's not far, in my opinion, it's not far off it. It's there's a lot of corruption, the past influence of the church in that, so what I would do was that, I would keep campaigning as a Republican for an all Ireland socialist republic, and I wouldn't abandon it just that ideal because of my own expectations, because that's my goal, and I think unification would be the first step. As I said, the corruption, discrimination, elitism in the 26 counties, that needs challenged just as much as it needs challenged in the 6 counties.
Okay. Michael, do you want to add anything to that?
Basically, I would, like what Brian was saying, I wouldn't get in the vote and sail away because I didn't like the nature of the regime in Ireland. I would adopt a position probably that people did in Italy when it was a fascist regime, people did in Germany when it was a fascist regime, the French did against the German occupation, and be honest with you, like, we don't have to look too far back in the past to see about the rise of the blue shirts and the attitude adopted to that. So that'd be somewhere along the lines of that. As I say, it's very hypothetical. Okay. And if Britain was a utopian socialist state, I have no doubt they would be support for defeating fascist regimes and such.
Okay. Second last question, guys, and it gets to the nub, I suppose, of how we think and why we think and what we believe. How much, and this is out to everybody, how much of your commitment to either the pro-union position or the United Ireland Independent Republican position, how much of that is based on emotions and historical connections, and how much is it based on practical thinking and application? So thinking the process out and that it would be more favourable for your communities to be in one or the other. How much of it is about emotions and history, and how much is it about practical considerations? Maybe Brian first. Can I throw that out to you, Brian?
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
It's probably a bit of both. I mean, you can't deny your identity and what you were born into and what you grew into. I mean, I've been apologising for being British for the last 30 years. It's been shoved in the face, and it's been physically attacked, verbally attacked because of that identity. So naturally that would that gets your back up, and you become more determined to retain your sense of identity. I mean, if you go to any country in the world, you know, America as an example, or even in the South, I mean, there's nothing wrong. You shouldn't be apologising for where you're from and where your home is and what you believe in. It's how you're brought up. And I was brought up in a Protestant cultural identity. I was brought up supporting certain sporting clubs and, you know, supporting the All-Ireland football team, but also support the international rugby team. And I'm a member of the Irish Cricket Board, which is an Ireland team. And I support that and protect that and stand up for that as much as anyone. And we have had that thrown in our face from a cricket perspective as well, about not having our own or having an All Ireland team. So to me, it's simply about being proud in your identity, and it's not about colonialism, and that's about sovereignty, and it's about, you know, a pride, a sense of nationalism. And to me, that's what would hurt most, and that's what I want to protect most. I don't want people telling me I should be something else or doing something else. Obviously, the practical arguments stand over themselves. I mean, I could stand here and list off 10 economic reasons why we're better in the UK, but I mean, everyone's heard them before, you know. But so to me, it's both, you know, and I would have huge concerns. I know Derek says that we're well received in the South, and it's a much more diverse country and welcoming country, I think, than here in Northern Ireland. But I mean, I would still have concerns. But as I said earlier on, you know, although we're pro-union, we've effectively in Derry here, we've effectively been in it. You know, the whole mentality of a national city here has had that pro-Irish kind of identity. So we have been fighting to stand up for our rights here now for 30 years. And my concern would be, you know, if you know, is Derry and how Derry treats its Protestants a microcosm of what it's going to be like in United Ireland? Am I going to have to spend the rest of my life in United Ireland fighting for my cultural rights and identity and not have to hide it under a bushel or be denied it or have to apologise for it? And I wouldn't be prepared to do that.
Okay. So it's not just the practical things. You just can't ignore your historical, your cultural upbringing and how that impacts our emotions as well. Derek, do you want to add to that? And I'm going to bring Gary and Michael in on the very same question then.
I think Brian's covered it very well there, Finbar. I mean, for myself, you know, I suppose I really consider myself to be Northern Irish, you know, and in a historical sense and in a cultural sense, because, you know, I feel a responsibility to carry on the culture that I've been brought up in, the bands, the music, the dance, the drama and stuff like that there. I think Brian makes a really good point about how we live locally, and a discussion we've had with Gary and his colleagues and others as well. You know, it's not, you know, it's not how they do it. You know, it's how they think and how they say it. And this past few months has been very uncomfortable in the city. If it is a microcosm of the state of United Ireland, then it's not a very comfortable state. So I suppose Brian has covered all them points, you know, very, very well.
Okay, thanks for that, Derek. Gary and Michael, we'll start off with Gary.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt, Finbar, that there is historical and traditional, you know, concerns, and they evoke emotions in a sense of sort of, you know, denied belonging. And we've all lived that out, collective and traditional memory of inequality, discrimination, countless atrocities, and and this is not just in the historical sense. This is actual things that you have witnessed, and that's been throughout the span of British intervention in Ireland. And there's no doubt that has had a strong emotional impact on my position. But having said that, we can't deny the practicalities of modern life and current situation that we find ourselves in. My opinion, the constituents that I represent will be better serviced and provided through the unification of the island. And there's a strong, despite what Derek and Brian has said, there's a strong social, cultural and economic argument for unification. And places like Craigan have seen very little change in the last 50 or 60 years. There's less jobs now than there was, then. Educational attainment is very poor. Youth unemployment, economic inactivity, it's generally very, very high. There's health inequalities which are very apparent, and that's been as a result of exclusion and underinvestment, neglected working class communities like Craigan exist across a political divide, and I believe that it's these communities which will see the greatest benefits of unification. And I just want to make one point, which is when unionist colleagues here say about it's been a difficult time here for unionists, it's a difficult time in this city for Republicans or nationalists who don't subscribe to the mainstream political party position. And even last night in the council, workers are entitled to wear the poppy, but Councillor Paul Gallagher has a motion which is 5 years in the process of allowing workers to wear the Easter lily, and effectively that had been blocked again by unionists, and the SDLP were led by the nose to support that. And unionism is in a minority in the city, so it's not just a one-way street here. There's a lot of inequalities right across the divide.
It would sound like there does seem on both sides to be areas that need certainly further explanation about acknowledging and respecting cultural differences and similarities, because there's a lot of cultural similarities too. Michael, do you want to come in there with anything?
Well, I think that you can't ignore history and the such, but the difference between being a nationalist and a Republican has a political viewpoint which sees a political direction, but this country would be far better off without the control of the mandarins and Whitehall and the people English elect, and have more control of our own destinies, be it me, Gary, Derek or Brian. And that's the difference between being a Republican. It's a political viewpoint you come to rather than be born into. And that's the only difference I would see. Of course, the historical backdrop to what happened in Ireland is complex and it's deep and all that. But sometimes that gets in the way in the clarity of our message. And I think that's one of the problems that we have as Republicans. They try and decipher all that and take all that away from it and say, look, we believe we're better off making our own decisions rather than leaving it to Boris or Tony Blair, whoever it may be.
Okay. We're coming up on the hour now, guys, so we're going to have to cut off very soon. One last question. I'm not going to make anybody answer this question. If anybody, Brian, you have commented on it already in relation to an independent sovereign state of the north of Ireland in some way that can have its own agreements with both London and Dublin. Does anybody else have any commentary on that? Is that just not a card that's going on the table for anybody?
It doesn't look at, in my view, we have tried all this type of stuff and it doesn't work. Even power sharing in the 6 counties doesn't work. Not with it. We look at what's going on at the minute. Everything that's been tried in the 6 counties has failed miserably, and I think we need to brave it and call it a day. And as Mickey just outlined, it's up for the people on this island for self-determination without any type of outside interference.
Derek, an independent sovereign Northern Ireland of some sort. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I can't imagine anything more absurd. They look at our current politicians running anything more in their own egos, and even that's too complicated for them. We have politicians at the our politics requires no minimum standard to get into. I kind of, I refute Gary and Michael's points there a wee bit, because the people are not going to run the country anyway, whether it's Mandarins in Whitehall or whatever, or Mandarins in Dublin and Brussels. It really makes no difference. We are only working class people, and we are going to be judged by that, and it's going to be run by that. But there's definitely no place for an independent Northern Ireland, because I struggle to see an independent United Ireland financially. I certainly can't see an independent Northern Ireland in any shape, form or fashion.
Michael?
I think most people, one thing we agree on is that it would be a non-starter. And I would allude to maybe that a lot of cultural things come from the PUL community. Has an all-Ireland basis, like the Orange Order is an all-Ireland.
Just when you say PUL, just for our viewers,
Loyalist, it's a term for people from the Unionist Loyalist. But a lot of their cultural thingies has an all-Ireland basis, like the Orange Order is an all-Ireland. Bobby Brian was saying about the cricket and rugby and hockey and things that are traditionally Unionist sports would be all-Ireland in nature, and even the Protestant churches, Methodist, Presbyterian and the Church of Ireland are all Ireland. So an independent Northern Ireland is never going to, the Northern state can't succeed. It's there artificially, it's there unnaturally, it's there as a sectarian headcount.
But you would have your rugby team, and you'd have your football team, I suppose, if nothing else. Okay, lads, we're just, and I don't mean to be flippant when I say that, just something came to my mind. We're going to finish up now. We're way over time in reality, but we're going to play the entire interview this evening at 9 o'clock anyway. I'd really like to thank all of you for joining us this morning on the show. Is there anything that any of you would like to close with? Any closing statements? Anything you'd like to add before we finish up?
No, I'd just like to thank you, Finbar, for affording us the opportunity. There's absolutely no harm done here. We're on here, we're pitching our arguments, we're selling our position, and I think that this is grassroots discussions, and whilst we may not agree on everything, but at least to me, I see it as progressive and having these debates and discussions, and they definitely, should be continuing right throughout the islands or whatever. At this level, because it's at this level where we will make the change. If we were to leave it to the politicians and the mandarins, it's not going to happen.
Any lads want to add anything to that?
Well, I agree with that. I think for ourselves, it's important that our message is heard in the 26 counties, and all the concerns are listened to. I think as been alluded to early on, I don't think anyone will vote again, for slogans on a bus. So therefore, all these arguments and all these discussions will need to take place, and that's a big thing that the pro-union community will now take on.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to have to finish off. I hope to have you all back on again and maybe have further discussions. And I just want to thank you, because I know if this was Sinn Féin, if this was the DUP, SDLP, we'd be beating around the bush, but not talking about anything. And they'd be getting well paid for it. You guys are not getting paid for this. It's your passion that has you here. Guys, we'll talk to you maybe in a month or two again on the show. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Okay.
Thank you.
Finbar, I think you're muted there.
Sorry, guys, I was on mute there. You won't see discussions like that on RTE or the BBC in relation to working class grassroots discussion about the present and the future of not just Northern Ireland, but Ireland and Britain. Stay with us for a few minutes, folks. I've got a couple of clips that I dare you not to burst out laughing when you see them. So just stay with us for a few minutes. Beforehand, I just want to mention a new programme that's starting on the Irish Inquiry. It's running from Monday to Fridays at 9 a.m. and it's not about politics. It's not about news. It's about you. It's about you, your well-being, your centeredness and your breathing. The programme is called Breathing for a Better Life. It's co-hosted by Sarah McCon and Stephen Kerr, who's also a producer on this show. And I think we have a promo clip. If you could run that first, please, Stephen. Okay, and we have Sarah here just for a couple of minutes to outline what the programme is about. Welcome to Double Down, Sarah. How are you?
Thanks so much, Finbar, for having me on and giving me the opportunity to speak about this very briefly. We're very excited about this new show.
No problem at all. I'm sure viewers are wondering the accent. Where does it come from? Where are you from?
Me? Okay, I'm German. I've been here for a long time, so my accent is probably very mixed at this point.
It'd be hard to tell. German, Dutch, it's hard to tell. Okay, Sarah, what is the programme about? If you had to tell people in 3 or 4 sentences, what's the programme about?
It's really about well-being. So we've been thinking that in these times, it's really hard to actually stay well. A lot of people are struggling mentally, are struggling maybe physically even. We're experiencing very unusual times, all of us, and we need tools to deal with that. So we've been looking at what we found very helpful ourselves, and on the inquiry in itself, we are trying to provide some solutions as well as good questions. And this is definitely a solution-based show, so we're looking forward to introducing the audience to some techniques that we've personally found really powerful in staying sane during these times and staying healthy and well as well as that.
When you say techniques, we're talking about, is it breathing, meditation?
Yeah, it's going to be mostly breathing, probably a couple of meditation elements in that. We've been very lucky in winning 5 professionals that are going to teach us all about different breathing techniques that they've been learning and teaching themselves and finding really useful in their lives. And we're going to run this show for 4 weeks. So every day of the week, we'll have a different presenter. No, sorry, not a different presenter, a different instructor with our presenter on the show, and we'll be talking about their experiences with breathing and meditation and all those kind of good techniques. And then we'll be getting a demonstration as well, where all the audience can join in and learn these breathing techniques, and then hopefully experience the benefits within the show or the time frame of the show and beyond.
Okay. I think breathing, we can all agree it's a very popular pastime in itself. But learning how to breathe in a way that brings inner calm so that we can move through this world more peacefully. I'm really surprised on a weekly basis, friends of mine who say, oh yeah, I've just finished a meditation. Oh yeah, I'm learning this new breathing technique. And I'm saying, where is this coming from? Didn't hear anything about this a few years ago. And it seems to be that everybody's getting into this. Have you noticed that it's not just a niche area now, that broad swathes of the population are looking at this?
Definitely, yeah. Breathing's getting very trendy these days. I guess it's been the same for us. Like we've discovered the benefits for ourselves, and we found that especially during times like these, when anxiety runs high, and people get very stressed. It's such a powerful thing and so easy to do. Everybody can do it. There's no restrictions to it, and there's so many different techniques. So you can find one for everyone, basically. So definitely, yeah. I'm not surprised that so many people are getting into it.
And you're going to be running at 9 a.m. Monday to Friday every week.
That's it. Yeah, for 4 weeks for the full month of February, and we're really looking forward to it. And we're hoping that everybody will join us, everyone that's watching today, and loads more people. There'll be a registration page on the Irish Inquiry website, so please watch out for the announcement of that on the Facebook page, and we'll share the link there so people can sign up. It's going to be delivered in a closed group on Facebook so that people have direct access to the presenter and to the different instructors as well. We'll have a little group going there, and we can exchange experiences and make it a safe space for participants to talk about how they're finding the techniques and what they're experiencing during the show. So hopefully people will be interested, and we'll have a really good 4 weeks of breathing together.
I'm really looking forward to it. I think what we'll find is the viewership on the Irish Inquiry and on Double Down will be some of the calmest, most collected viewership in Ireland, I hope. I'm going to leave you now, Sarah. Thanks for joining us. If anybody wants to get involved in this, 9 a.m. Monday to Friday on the Irish Inquiry, Breathing for a Better Life. You can
That's it. We're starting on Monday. So yeah, hope to see you all there. Thank you, Finbar.
Thank you, Sarah. We're just going to turn to a couple of what I have to say are just very comical clips that have come out of politics over the last week. Senator Schumer, who is one of the leading Democrats in the American Senate, was leading the charge on the second impeachment of Donald Trump this week. And he not only accused Trump of trying to create sedition in his commentaries and his tweets, but he also accused Trump of being just too damn sexy for American men. Yeah, you heard me right. Too damn sexy for American men. Will you roll that clip, please, Stephen?
The fact is, the House will deliver the article of impeachment to the Senate. The Senate will conduct a trial of the impeachment of Donald Trump. It will be a full trial. It will be a fair trial. But make no mistake, there will be a trial, and when that trial ends, senators will have to decide if they believe Donald John Trump incited the insurrection against the United States.
There you go. I knew that he had a little bit of a swagger about him, but I didn't think he was inciting erections all over the United States. Senator Lindsey Graham went one further when he was caught live, pre-news interview, caught live consulting his own conscience. Have a look at this.
Here now is Senator Lindsey Graham, who's the Senate Judiciary Committee. Here now is Senator Lindsey Graham, who's the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Oh, I just can't help. Every time I see that smile he puts on when he realizes he's been caught talking to his conscience, I just laugh more and more. Folks, next week we're going to be talking about events in the news, but we're also going to be talking about Cuba. We'll be talking about life under Cuba, under American embargoes on Cuba. We'll be discussing this with people who live in Cuba and also with some support groups for Cuba here in Ireland. Join us next week on Double Down on the Irish Inquiry, Thursday at 9 p.m.
Hey Leo, how are you? Blue shirts when you're depressed and alone. We'll teach you how to make scones. Oh boy, we're out on our own. Blue shirts, the nicest people you'd meet. Once you can prove you're elite and not the poor or the weak. Then there suddenly appeared before me Leo the Magnificent. I heard Leo roaring, please adore me. And when I looked, the streets had turned to gold. But it's only us who can see. To you they're grey and dreary. That's blue shirt privilege, you see. Blue shirts, a dodgy deal come to us. We'll leak the info, no fuss. Throw telltales under the bus. And then there suddenly appeared before me Leo the Magnificent. I heard Leo roaring, please adore me. And when I looked, the streets had turned to gold. La la la, but it's only us who can see. To you they're grey and dreary. That's blue shirt privilege, you see. He's not getting paid. None of this is real. This isn't even plugged in. Blue shirt.